Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and we're back with another Warhammer The Old World Almanac article. So we've done two of the phases, the last one being the movement phase, and we're now on to the shooting phase. So here we are, it is the 13th of November, and it says darken the skies with volleys of arrows, quarrels, shot, bolts, balls and screaming skulls. Okay, so let's have a look and see what this phase is all about. Okay, so yeah, moving into the shooting phase, that's fine. As with the other phases, the shooting phase is broken into 4 steps, so following that familiar format. So we're going to declare targets, roll to hit, roll to wound, and remove casualties. Everyone and everything shoots in its phase, whether it's a peasant bowman, a barbarian javelineer, Kemrian screaming skull catapult, or a high elven mage. Okay, so we've got our first weapon profile up. Let's have a look, see what we can deduce from what they have posted. So a longbow, so we know longbows. So longbows were the longest range bows, 30 inches. That's consistent with pretty much all the editions, at least going back to, I'm trying to think now, what, 35th, 6th edition was all back to, was 30 inches, so that's as expected. Okay, we got a strength of 3, that's pretty normal. AP of 0, so there is a separate AP stat. That suggests that there is the AP is not tied into strength. So in the past, for example, strength 4 would automatically give you an AP of -1. Given they've listed it separately, suggests it might not. And if we look at the Screaming Skull catapult below, what do we got there? Strength 4 is AP -1, which is consistent, but strength 8 would be an AP of -5. So given the fact that strength 8 there is -3, would also then suggest that it is separate. So okay, so it looks like AP is separate and not tied into the strength of the attack. I think I quite like that, to be honest. I think it gives more flexibility in the rules, that high strength doesn't necessarily make you high armor piercing, but it does have a special rule of armor bane 1. Now that's interesting because you've got a separate AP stat. So armor bane 1 doesn't suggest to me that it just gives a blanket -1 AP, is why wouldn't you just include that in the rules? My suspicion around that would be that there's probably something else tied to it to get that additional -1. Maybe it's for targets within half range, you get an additional AP, or you get AP -1 essentially. Don't know, that's kind of what's in my mind there. And then we've got volley fire. Okay, so we'll have to see. It doesn't tell us what that is. Volley fire was a special rule. It was in the 8th edition, but 8th edition, 1st and 2nd rank could fire volley fire, allowed half the models in the ranks behind to fire, so we'll have to look more into that. Screaming skull catapult, typical sort of stone throw, about out to 60 inches, so it does have a minimum range. Strength 4, but with the brackets of 8, that suggests we've got a template here, and the hole in the middle of the template, i.e. the one model underneath the centre of the template, would suffer the strength 8 AP -3 hit. So we've got bombardment, cumbersome, so that'll be in regards to its movement, flaming attacks and magical attacks, which clearly are both in and expected. Move or shoot, so it can't move and shoot as expected. Multiple wounds D3 +1, I'm sure that will be only for the central target. And screaming skulls would be obviously a special rule in the rule book around that, probably something to do with leadership as it was in the past. So let's have a look at the note. Sorry, just going back to the longbow, I've just noticed there, in the narrative, a skilled archer can hit an enemy from a great distance, only increasing in deadliness as the range shortens. So that's where I think the armor bane might come in half range. So I've just noticed that, and I look at the notes below on the Screaming Skull, shoots like a stone thrower, uses the bombardment special rule, which is good. So you get a 3-inch blast template, you've got a stone thrower misfire table. So it'd be interesting to see, are we going back to scatter and artillery dice? Quite possibly. Which would, if you think about things like cannons and stuff. We know what we don't know with the artillery stuff is are you still able to snipe out characters? But there is a misfire table, so you're going to be able to misfire somehow, whether it's on a scatter and artillery dice or whether it's rolling a 1 to hit or something like that. And yes, as we said, the multiple D3 plus 1 special rule applies only to a single model whose base lies underneath the central hole of the template. Okay, so templates are in. We've got, everything there looks pretty standard. Volley fire, okay, is interesting. So first pick a unit, declare its target. Yeah, that's normal. A unit can only shoot if it has a ranged weapon. No surprises there. So you can't shoot if you march or charge, no supplies, and not if you're fleeing. Okay, that's normal. Nothing surprising there. You can't split fire, so there's no splitting fire. Every model in the unit must shoot the same target. And in some cases, not every member in the unit can let loose. Okay, models can almost always only shoot once, no matter how many attacks, unless they have volley fire or are stationed on a hill. Only the front rank may fire. Okay, so that's going back a bit, because it used to be the front 2 ranks could fire. So we're going back now, so only the front rank can fire. It means that hills are going to be really important, because if you're stationed on a hill and the rear rank is higher, they would be able to, that secondary rank could fire. So hills will become incredibly important. And the volley fire. So it looks like volley fire is going to allow a second rank to fire. Now we know longbows have that. We know Bretonnian peasant archers have longbows as an example. So it's going to be interesting. My initial thoughts are probably this is going to be a bit of a nerf to direct fire weapons, and that probably most of the bows, including normal bows, even short bows, and when I think of something like night goblins, will probably get volley fire to see single rank 10, 15, 20 man archer units across the table. It looks kind of a bit weird, so I'd like to think that anything that's an archer would be like this, but something like handgunners being direct fire, for example, are probably more likely to not have the volley fire rule, and they'll get something else. Okay, that's good, that's interesting. Right, once the target's been chosen, time to roll to hit. So we're back to old style ballistic skill, so there's no 3+, 4+ to hit on the weapon profile like in Age of Sigmar. 1 to 10, so that's old school. Okay, higher ballistic skill is, the more likely to hit your target. So if we look to determine whether a model hits its target, you must make a roll to hit. Yeah, d6 for each model, and you need to equal or beat the number. So there you go, ballistic skill of 1, 6+, ballistic skill 2, 5+, ballistic skill 3, 4+. So you could expect, if we think of peasant bowman, then it probably something like a ballistic skill of 3. A skeleton archer, ballistic skill of 2, for example, so they'll be hitting on 5s, peasant bowman on 4s. If you've got a ballistic skill of 6 or higher, you get re-rolls, but you don't get like so a re-roll to hit, so it has a lower chance on the re-roll. So if you've got a ballistic skill of 6, it's a 2+ to hit on the first one, but if you fail, it's 6+. So only a ballistic skill of 10 will get you a 2+, re-roll. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, with that, it kind of suggests as well that, it looks like there's going to be negatives to shoot, right? So, I do think in looking at this edition at the moment, with missile weapons, that there certainly might be less of an impact than in 8th edition or Age of Sigmar, for example, in terms of missile weapons. I think it's going to be harder to do massive amounts of damage. That's just a guess at the moment, that's just a personal opinion. So various negatives, so -1 to hit if you've moved. So if you've got a peasant bowman unit, so let's say they're hitting on 4s, they move, and at long range they're hitting on 6s. Right, so that's quite significant. So if they're long range, what's that likely to be? Over half range. So, peasant bowmen are hitting on 5s over 15 inches. Skeleton archers would be hitting on 6s over 15 inches, if that is indeed what long range is. And if the target has partial cover, you've got another negative to that. So, it looks like those, certainly if we take into account, basic missile troop units who you're not likely to have a ballistic skill of above 3, they are often going to be hitting, in fact most of the time I think, going to be hitting on 5s and 6s, potentially worse than that, because natural 1s always miss, but negative modifiers can stack past 6+. So we're back to, so 6s don't always hit, so you may have to roll a 7+, 8+, and so on, which is a natural 6 followed by another roll of 4, 5, or 6. So incredibly hard. So I think we can say that low skilled basic line infantry with missile weapons is going to be of limited impact, I think, unless taken in massed numbers. So there's more old school goodness. So roll to wound. Okay, so back to a roll to wound chart. And there are toughness caps as well, which is great. So no more 6 always wounds. So a strength 1 against a toughness 10 target, you could still wound on a 6. That's gone. That's great. Strength 3 bow, simply too weak to harm. So if you've got strength 3, you can't harm a toughness 9 or 10. Okay, that makes sense. And then if we look at how the table works, so if we take the 4, so if you've got, if it's weapon strength 4, toughness 4. So if it's the same number of strength and toughness, it's 4s. If it's 1 less, it's 3s. If it's 1 more, it's 5s. And then after that, it's 2s to 6s. So not a difficult table. With playing a few games, you'll have learnt that. You won't even have to refer to the table. Fairly straightforward there. So if your weapon strength 4, your toughness is 3, it's 3s. So it's not too dissimilar to where we are. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so so far I like that. I like the back to the ballistic skill. I like the to wound chart. It is very old school, but I do like that. It does feel better, like when you're shooting a tiny little strength 3 bow at something that's got toughness 9. To be wounding on 6, it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. So I'm very, very happy with seeing that so far. Okay. So then you get a saving throw, so you get AP, we talked about briefly, light armor 6+, heavy armor 5+, can be boosted with a shield. So if you've got heavy armor and a shield, you're on a 4+, that's pretty typical. Barded mount will give you an extra 1 as well. Certain spells and magical items can also improve the save. So, you can expect barded knights to have a 2+ save, because you'll probably get an extra plus to your save for being mounted, which is how you got to 2+ before. So a normal knight that's not barded would have a 3+, for example. Okay, there's a small difference, however. Models can have a ward save. Ward save cannot be modified by AP and is rolled for as a separate save made after the armor roll has failed. So again, back to old school, you don't choose which save you're using. You do the armor save if you can, and if you fail that, you do get to make your ward save. So there's likely to be some rules in there which no saves are allowed, which will include the ward save. Okay. So then the final step is to remove casualties, take panic tests where necessary, remove one model for every wound caused unless the target has more. That's basic. I need to take a panic test. So panic test if you kill more than 25% of the models in a unit. And then it says then another article will cover what happens with that. Okay. What else have we got here? Still more to go. So we've got a plethora of special rules. So we've got big beasties have breath weapons, so you can expect the flame template for things like dragons and so on like that. Kemrian War Sphinx. Skirmish cavalry can fire and flee. Dwarven Iron Drakes have quick shot. Okay. Right, that's interesting. So that potentially could be something like move and shoot without penalty. If I think back to some of the old rules, fire and flee is an obvious one, breath weapon, obvious one. Okay, so now we're on to magic spells, magic missiles and magical vortexes are used in the shooting phase. So human wizards use battle magic. Now this doesn't mean the colleges of magic are there, for example. These could still be the, outlawed human wizards just using battle magic. But we've got fireball in there. It also doesn't mean that it's fire magic. We don't know in terms of battle magic what that includes. Could just be, there might not be the 8 different laws of magic, for example, and in fact there probably isn't, but because it doesn't list off like fire magic or anything, it just says battle magic. Well, those blessed by the dark gods, so law of demonology is back. Okay, so you might have things like law of necromancy and stuff like that. Okay, it's a vortex of chaos. So let's have a look at the fireball. Magic missile, casting value of 8+. So if it would just be a 2d6 to cast, that would be incredibly, that's definitely up there in terms of chance of casting it. It's going to be quite hard, reliably at least. Does that suggest we're likely to be back at a pool of dice? Quite possibly. Range 24 inches. 2d6 strength, 4 hits, each with an AP of 0. Okay, so quite a lot of hits at a reasonable strength, and it's got flaming attacks, but doesn't have any AP, so if you're using armor, that's going to be useful. Okay, interesting. So that casting value, that's going to be the key, is how we cast, right? Because this means either this spell could be relatively easy to cast if you've got a pool of dice, or it could be quite challenging to cast if you're just casting it on 2 dice, and do you pass or fail? Now, Vortex of Chaos. So this is a vortex. It has the same casting value, but only a range of 15. And it remains in play, obviously, until either, I guess, it vanishes or is dispelled, I guess. Don't know. I can't imagine it remains in play for the whole game. Place a small 3-inch blast template. The central hole is within 15 inches of the caster. Okay. Whilst in play, the template is treated as dangerous terrain. Okay. Template moves d6 inches in a random direction during the start of every turn, sub-phase. Any unit... in a random direction at the start of every turn, sub-phase. So is it moving 4 times in a turn? Start during every start of turn, sub-phase. Okay. Need to just clarify that one in terms of how I'm reading that. Any unit, friend or foe, the moving template touches suffers d6 +1 strength 3 hits, each with an AP of 0. So not particularly damaging, but does remain in play. So if you put that in the enemy lines, this thing's moving around. Particularly if you've got larger units, it's likely to run over them. So certainly earlier on, it's quite you could see this spell going off. But once you get into the late game, you don't really want this thing running around, because you're going to be, in hand-to-hand combat with a lot of these. You don't want it running over your own units. So vortexes have always been touch and go. Because you don't want them to randomly move into your own lines. The fireball looks particularly nice. As a spell. 2d6 strength, 4 hits, quite nice. Lack of AP, is not unexpected, but again ties into the fact that AP is separate and not tied into the strength. Okay, and that's it for the shooting phase. So next week they're saying it's going to be the combat phase, and just as a reminder, next week I will be back home in the UK, and we'll be back to a better quality of article. I am still in the US on honeymoon. I've got 1 week to go, and I say next week we'll be back to normal. Overall, there's nothing in here that's a major shock and surprise, I would have to say. I think the biggest surprise is we're back to single rank shooting. I think is interesting. I think it's interesting that the AP is not tied into strength. I think that's probably the biggest things in there. Oh, and templates. So I think if you're looking for key things in here about how the game will play, strength not tied into AP, shooting front rank only, unless obviously you've got volley fire, and the fact that we are back to using templates, though we don't know if we've got misfire and artillery dice or not. I kind of think we might. The fact that we're back to the old style hit and wound charts, I don't think that's really a surprise. I think you could have expected that. Magic obviously remains a key one in understanding how we get to that casting value. So I think that's the biggest thing that leaves an unanswered question in this article, is how we cast the magic as opposed to everything else, which I think is quite clear. Overall, when I'm looking at what we've seen so far from the rules, we're starting to piece it together. We are still looking at things in isolation, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions. But when we see the 3 phases we've covered so far, and when I see the movement phase with the shooting phase, I'm cautiously optimistic about the rules I've seen so far. There's nothing I've seen that I'm like, oh my god, I don't want to touch this game. It's looking quite interesting, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm starting to get a little bit more positive about how the rules look for this. Still, obviously, taking into account what we know so far, we will never be able to fully understand the game until we've played multiple games on the tabletop. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the article today. That article being the Old World Almanac shooting phase. It's the 3rd in Warhammer Community's series, with the hand-to-hand combat phase coming next week. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't know, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And also in the comments down below, let me know what you think about what we've seen so far on these rules. And as always, if you want to see more content, please hit that subscribe button. It is free for you to do, and it means a huge amount for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. Tune back in for some more The Old World content. As I say, we've got hand-to-hand combat phase coming next week, and also beginning next week, you will start to see the Vampire Counts series coming out, having just finished the Bretonian, and after Vampire Counts will be the Empire. So from Monday next week onwards, you will start to see the articles reappearing as I finish Honeymoon and get back into the Old World content.